Hello, friends. Welcome to Literary Concepts. Today's topic is Victorian criticism. Now, let us try to understand the Victorian criticism. Introduction. So, Victorian criticism was started during the 19th century, a period that marked by significant social, political, and economic changes, so brought about by the Industrial Revolution, the expansion of the British Empire, and the rise of scientific thought. So the Victorian criticism was occurred, so started during 19th century. So that 19th century period, we find different significant social, political, and economic changes. So because of the Industrial Revolution and the expansion, the spreading of the British Empire, and the rise of scientific thought. Because of these events, so we find social, political, and economic changes during 19th century. And in this backdrop, the Victorian criticism was started, emerged. So Victorian critics, so they tried to attempt to reconcile the tensions between tradition and progress, faith and reason, and art and morality. So the Victorian critics, they tried to reconcile, understand, that is, to coordinate between that tensions, sorry, coordinate the tensions between the tradition and progress, the tradition and development, and faith and reason, that is logical thinking. Reason means logical thinking, and art and morality. So between these issues, the Victorian critics, they try to reconcile, they try to coordinate to bring a kind of harmony. The Victorian period, which was started in the year 1837 and ended in 1901, so coincided with Queen Victoria's reign, so it was a time of industrial expansion, scientific advancements, for example, Darwin's theory of evolution, and colonial dominance. So Victorian period started in 1837 and ended in 1901. So which was happened along with Queen Victoria's rule. So this was the time of industrial expansion. So the industrial development was happened, and the scientific advancement, so scientific development was also happened. For example, Darwin's theory of evolution happened during this time, and the colonial dominance, the British dominance, took place during Victorian period. So literature became a tool for addressing contemporary social issues. It was a tool, it was a weapon for addressing, so to talk about the contemporary social issues or social topics, reflecting the struggles of an age, the fights, the conflicts of an that particular age, that is caught between traditional values and modern realities. So the conflicts and the struggles of Victorian age was reflected in the literature of the Victorian period, and which is we find that is a conflict between traditional values and modern realities. Even we also find the rise of periodicals, that is, magazines and literary journals during this Victorian period. For example, the uh, journals or magazines like the Fortnightly Review, the Edinburgh Review, made literary criticism more accessible and influential. So these kind of journals and magazines, fortnightly review, the Edinburgh Review, such periodicals, so made literary criticism more accessible, more reachable, more available, and at the same time influential, having a strong effect on the people. This is about the introduction of the Victorian criticism. Now let us understand the characteristics of Victorian criticism. The first characteristic is moral purpose. So, moral purpose, the literature of the Victorian period was considered as a vehicle for moral and social instruction. So, the literature was seen as it is a vehicle for moral and social teachings, instructions, understand social teachings. So, Victorian critics they emphasized literature's ability to elevate and improve society. So, they the Victorian critics they focused more on the literature's ability to elevate, the raise and improve the society. The second characteristic is a historical perspective. So that is historical outlook, historical view. The critics of Victorian criticism, okay, the Victorian period, so they analyze the literature in the context of its historical and cultural background. So critics analyzed the literature in the scenario of historical and cultural background, and often frequently exploring its relationship to earlier literary traditions. So they explored the literature's relationship with the previous literary traditions. That is the second characteristic, that is historical perspective. And the third characteristic is a concern for social reform. Concern for social reform, societal changes. So, literature was viewed as a means to address issues like poverty, gender inequality, and class conflict, the class differences. Understand? So, the literature it was a tool. So it was a means to address, to speak about, to articulate the issues like poverty, gender inequality, and class conflicts. And criticism often reflected the Victorian preoccupations. The Victorian fixed preoccupations means the fixed thinking, the fixed thoughts with the social and ethical questions. So they always the criticism always reflected. They focused more on the Victorian obsessive thoughts with the social and ethical questions. So that is the third one. And the fourth one is integration of science and literature. So that is blending science and literature, combination of science and literature. Victorian age saw a growing interest in how literature could interact with scientific developments. So we find a kind of deep interest how literature could interact with scientific developments, particularly evolutionary theory, understand, during the Victorian age. And the critics explored how literature could reconcile faith and reason, how it harmonize, how it coordinate faith and reason. The fifth characteristic is the role of the critic. The The critics were considered as guides and educators. The critics were seen as they were guides and educators, so who shaped the public tastes. Understand? So they shape the public tastes and moral values, public feelings and moral values. The Victorian criticism particularly aimed to be accessible to the expanding middle class readership. So Victorian criticism It was aimed to be reachable and accessible, more available to the expanding, ever growing middle class readers. The last characteristic is focus on the novel. So during Victorian age, the novel became dominant literary form. Novel became that most dominant literary form. So with critics paying special attention to its moral, social, and psychological dimensions. So the critics, they have given more attention towards moral, social, and psychological aspects in novel. So these are the important characteristics of the Victorian criticism. Now let us try to understand the major figures, the major critics and their contributions. The Matthew Arnold is the first critic whose time period started in 1822 and ended in 1888. His important works are Culture and Anarchy, which was published in 1869, Essays in Criticism, which was published in 1865. So Matthew Arnold key contributions. So he supported for the study of literature as a means of cultural improvement and moral education. Matthew Arnold so promoted the study of literature. So for what? It is a means, it is a vehicle of cultural improvement. It is a means of cultural improvement and moral education. And Matthew Arnold defined criticism. He defined criticism in his own words as the disinterested endeavor to learn and propagate the best that is known and thought in the world. Understand? So we have to remember this a definition of criticism given by the Matthew Arnold, that is the disinterested endeavor, the disinterested, uninterested, not interested, not showing more interest, endeavor, attempt to learn and propagate, to spread the best that is known, already known, and thought, already thought in the world. So this particular statement is very very popular and is very important for the examination purpose, for any competitive examination purpose. And he criticized, Matthew Arnold criticized that materialism and utilitarianism of his age of Victorian period, and promoted the idea of culture as a counterbalance. So he criticized that materialistic views and utilitarian thoughts of Victorian age, and he promoted that idea of culture as a counterbalance, balancing, understand, something. So, and he emphasized the importance of high seriousness in literature. That is, so the serious treatment of the subject matter. High seriousness means very serious treatment of the subject matter in literature. So these are the key contributions which we find from Matthew Arnold. The next figure is John Ruskin. John Ruskin, whose time period started in 1890 and ended in 1900, his important works are Modern Painters, which was written between 1843 and 1860, and the next one is The Stones of Venice, which was written between 1851 and 1853. John Ruskin's key contributions are he applied moral and social principles, that social ethics, to the critique of art and literature. So he implemented that moral and social principles to the criticism of art and literature, and he supported for the integration of art, nature, and society, emphasizing their interdependence. So, blending of the combination of art, nature, and society, and then that focuses on the emphasizing their interdependence, emphasizing their interdependence. And the next, he criticized that industrialization and its impact on creativity and the human spirit. So John Ruskin, he critiqued that industrialization and its influence on the creativity and the human spirit, human character, and human feelings. The next critic is Thomas Carlyle. Thomas Carlyle time period started in 1795 and ended in 1881. His important works are, the first one is Sartor Resartus, which was published in 1836. The next one is On Heroes, Hero Worship and the Heroic in History, which was published in 1841. Sartor Resartus, On Heroes, Hero Worship and the Heroic in History. These are the two important works of Thomas Carlyle. His key contributions are, he thought literature as a reflection of the spiritual struggles of humanity. According to him, literature is a reflection of the spiritual struggles of humanity, human beings, understand. And he supported for a hero-centric approach to history and literature. So Thomas Carlyle, he promoted for a hero-centric and approach to history and literature. And he was seen literature as a means to inspire moral and social action. So it was literature was considered to inspire moral and social action, as per Thomas Carlyle. The next critic is George Eliot. Okay, that is, George Eliot is a pen name of Mary Ann Evans. Mary Ann Evans is the original name of the critic George Eliot. George Eliot is a pen name, and her lifetime started in 1819 and ended in 1880. So George Eliot's key works are essays and prefaces, introductions, as well as novels like Middlemarch, which was written between 1871 to 1872. So George Eliot's key contributions. So she supported for realism in literature. So that is realism, the practicality, that is focusing more on reality and practicality, and naturalism in literature. So where that emphasizing the moral complexities of human life, the moral difficulties of human life. And she criticized overly sentimental and escapist literature. George Eliot criticized the overly sentimental and escapist literature and favors works grounded in psychological depth and social realism. She favored, understand, to the works which have that background in psychological, based on the psychological depth and social realism. These are the key contributions of George Eliot. The next critic is Walter Pater. Walter Pater, whose time period started in 1839 and ended in 1894. His important work is The Renaissance, which was published in 1873. His key contributions. So he was a champion of aestheticism. He was a champion, the pioneer of aestheticism. He supported and he promoted that aestheticism, which focuses on the beauty of art and its ability to provide intense personal experiences. Aestheticism, which focused on the beauty of art, on the beauty of art and its ability to provide that intense personal experience, that deep personal experiences. Walter Pater emphasized, focused more on art for art's sake. So this is very, very important. phrase art for art's sake. So he emphasized on that. Walter Pater and supporting for the appreciation of art without moral or utilitarian considerations. So he advocated for appreciation of art without moral or any utilitarian matters. Okay, utilitarian considerations, factors. The next critic, the figure is Charles Darwin, so whose time period started in 1809 and ended in 1882. His important work is On the Origin of Species, which was published in 1859. Even though he was not a literary critic, Charles Darwin's theories influenced Victorian literature and criticism. So Charles Darwin was not a literary critic, but his theories, that theory of evolution, influenced Victorian literature and criticism. So the critics of Victorian age, they analyzed how evolutionary theory reshaped humanity's understanding of its place in the world and affecting themes in literature. So the critics of Victorian time, they analyzed how the Darwin's evolutionary theory reshaped humanity's understanding of its place, humans' understanding of the world, okay, of its place in the world, and affecting, so that is touching, moving the themes in literature, that affecting, influencing themes in literature. So these are the key figures which we see in Victorian criticism. So if you like the content, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.